All right, so Fusion 360 can be a super intimidating application. So this is the very first video, and in this very first video, all I'm going to do is introduce you to the interface. What you have here on the left-hand side is, we think about them, and they call them projects. What I will tell you is you can think about them like master folders, and then if you go inside of a project, like I'll go into products, you'll have folders. The first thing I will tell you about this is, well, I actually tell two things. First thing is you absolutely positively need to be organized and know how you're going to organize everything before you start. And the second thing I would tell you is that this project area, think of each of these as discrete universes. You can't pass data through different projects very well. So it's better to have, if you have two similar ideas that you want to create, it's better to create them and put them into one project and then have different folders underneath. Like, here are all my products, right? So I keep all my products and then have multiple folders, and you can have subfolders and all that other stuff. But I do that so that I can mix and match stuff within that universe. So my first bit of advice here, my first tip is, think of projects as universes. Try to keep data in the same universe. It's very hard to move data in and out of different universes. It's possible, it's tricky, it's not designed for that. So don't think of a project as a folder only when you get into a project. Think of it as a universe, and when you get into a universe, you can folder up and you can move around within the universe, no problem. But that's the first thing. Okay, so this is your main project tree. At the bottom, what you have here at the top, you have recent data. I don't really mess around with that because I know where I want to go. You have a demo project, so you can click in there and learn. And then at the bottom, you have all of the sample stuff. And that is hugely important. You can go in there and find everything from machines to all sorts of different stuff. This will become, as you develop your skills, this little area will become important. Now, assets is something that's very interesting. I just want to briefly touch on that. If you have, for example, it wouldn't be for a 3D printer, but for example, I have that machine in my garage, which you haven't seen yet, but I have the machine in my garage where I cut metal. Well, so you can think of it like a printer driver, that driver that tells Fusion how to the parameters of that is in this cam post area, and you can see all these different machines that I have. These are like printer drivers, and I post it up there, and then anytime I'm in an application and I want to cut with a machine, then I'll pull up the right driver. All right. So to navigate around folders, you click into, projects, you click into a project, and then within a project, you can see now we're at products. I can click in there. There's even a subfolder called tools, and you see that I'm at tool grips, big grips, master. If I click master, I'm back at the products top of the universe, right? So all the bearing tools, I'll just show you that real quick. Bearing tools is, where are my tools? Bearing tools, current versions of the tools, and then I have everything separated into an extractor file, which is my models, and then a cam file, which is my cutting files. So that'll make sense later, but here are the spacers, and this is the spacer cutting file. Here are other ones that I've done. These are other spacers that that I've made. So these are just different parts, the handles, that kind of thing. All right, so that's the navigation area. I'll load up this handle file so you can see something load. So if you double click on the file, boom, you're seeing a lot of things here. You're seeing a lot of red buttons. You're seeing this like navigation tree, all this other stuff. The first thing you need to know is you need to know what workspace you're in. So I know from using this, because this is a handle in there, and I'll get to navigation in a separate video, like how you move this mouse and everything in a separate video. But because this has got the handle and it's also inside this tube, I'm in the manufacturing workspace, which is what this thing is right here. So I'm going to go back to the design workspace, and now we're in the design workspace. And you can see as I zoom in, you can see there's a hole here, and that hole stops at this point. And you can, so I'm going to introduce you to a concept called views. So what you're seeing here is a model, and you're seeing the wireframe of the model, and we're actually looking inside the model. And the way that you adjust that is you come down here and you do shaded. That would be what it would look like if you were looking at it from the outside. Ignore this little hexagon up here. I'll talk about that in a second, or I'll talk about that later in another video. This would be shaded with hidden edges. So there's that hole, the bottom of that hole you can see. You can also see through it, so I can see the other side. If you zoom in, you'll see that that's a solid line and that's a dashed line, so I'm seeing through the model. You can also shade it with visual edges only. That kind of looks like a solid model. Wireframe, so that's a wireframe of the whole thing. This becomes how you see and what you want to see becomes really important later on. It's not, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but I want to just introduce you to the concept of visual styles. So this is the one with hidden edges. This is the same. This is a wireframe with visible edges. You know, it's the same idea. One's shaded, one's not. And so I tend to bounce between the shaded, and what I really like is the shaded with hidden edges. And depending on how complex my models are, I have to go to wireframe to look through different stuff when you have different stuff. All right, so that is the this is sort of looking at a model. Let's start with a blank. I just kind of want to show you a model in there and how you would load one. But let's start with a blank file. So I didn't make any changes, so I didn't need to save that model. And I've got my untitled file. And the very, very first thing you need to do with any file, if you're going to create something, is you need to save it somewhere. So that's why we did the navigation first. So I'm going to go back up to products. I'm going to go back up here. Sorry, I clicked on to products. And then I'm going to come in here and we're going to go into, I don't know, I'll just pick one. We'll go into home file. And let's say I wanted to just save my file here. So I'm just going to save my test file. I would come up here. You've got a file menu, open, do, save as, like your traditional file menu. You've got this opens and closes the navigation pane. And then here's your little save button. So we're going to save it. And because we're in this master home folder, home master, it's going to put it wherever is in the navigation pane. And I'm just going to say, you know what, test file 1. Okay. And if I wanted to create a folder, I could create a folder, but then you can't drag and drop it. You have to go to another application to move things around. So it's a little tricky. You got to move it and all this other stuff. So my advice to you is save it where you want to save it. All right. You can also upload files into the same folder structure. If I had like pictures I wanted to model off of or something like that. Okay. So this is the main window, and what I'll do is I'll just close this navigation pane. Whoops, I'll close this navigation pane. Up here in the upper left-hand corner, you have different workspaces depending on what you're doing. So if you are drawing something, you're going to be in the design workspace. And see how when I hover over here, it pops up what that workspace is. So in this workspace, this is for mechanical drawing. This one's a rendering workspace. So if you're gonna draw something, you can add lights to it and put material properties to it, so you can see what it looks like. This is if you want to animate it. This is like that cool exploding view of like parts exploding out. You can do simulation. So this has a whole physics algorithm thing. You're not going to mess with that. Manufacturing is where you go to either cut it with like a laser, or a lot of times what I'll do, you can 3D print out of here, but I don't do that. What I do is I export a model in 3D print. But if I'm going to cut anything on my machines, both my big flat router or my mill or my lathe, then I design it first, and then I load it in the manufacturing. I design it first, and I switch to manufacturing, then make all my files for cutting. And then there's also drawings. So traditionally, when you send parts out to be made, you give the company a set of master drawings, and that becomes the model. The model isn't the master. The drawings are the master. And the reason is that there's information in the drawing. You can point out information in a drawing, things that are important like tolerances, that you cannot do in a model. A model is just this absolute idea, whereas a drawing will have a representation of the absolute idea, but it'll also have all the detail, like how big a radius has to be, the maximum, like when you cut something, everything has a tolerance of the size in and out. So it'd be like, what's the dimension? I can go plus minus whatever my primary dimension is. So a drawing will allow you to do that. But for you, you're gonna, if you want to 3D print, you're gonna be in the design workspace. Okay? So that's the first. So it loads up, and so you don't really have to do anything. Now the next thing that is super important, like the navigation pane, this is your sort of navigation pane within the design itself. And there's going to be a lot of things up here. So you've got document settings, that's like a folder. You've got named views, so this will allow you to switch between right, left, top, and I'll get to all that in other videos. And then origin. So the very first thing you need to do, there's nothing that says parts here or drawings. So the very first thing you need to do is you need to right click and create a new component. If you do not do this and you just start drawing, it puts all the data at the master level. And like organizing everything else, don't put anything at the master level. Everything is made in a folder underneath the master. Because what you'll end up learning is you may draw a single part, but a part may, a finished product or whatever may contain multiple parts. And so in your file structure, if you make something that has 3 parts, I would expect the file to have 3 components. And inside those, they can have multiple parts inside that. So a component is, you can think of it like a container that represents a group of similar objects, either one or a few. So it'd be like, an example of a few things would be like a bracket and 4 screws can all be in the same component because you're going to always move those together. But you wouldn't put 2 brackets in the same component. You would put a second bracket in a second component because you may move that bracket somewhere else, or you may need to change the design or whatever. So one of the weird things, or sort of things you got to think about when we draw in Photoshop or Illustrator, or we do that, we're doing something to a single entity. When you're designing in a 3D model, you are really designing multiple entities, and so how you organize those entities is really important. All right, so here's our part. This is our file, test file, and we've got 3 components. Then you'll notice these plus minus signs, this eyeball, and this arrow. So I'm going to arrow this down. And so what I have here is the component. You know that the master file has an origin, and the component has an origin. And it is, suffice to say, that is super important later on. It is not important to begin with, but understand that there is an, so in a 3D world, there's an X and a Y and a Z, and those are abstract concepts. And so what you do is you apply that X, Y, and Z to components, and you can apply it to the whole universe. And so a simple example, why is that important? When I go to cut something, there's the top of the part and the bottom of the part, but I need to cut both the top of the part and the bottom of the part, but I can't do that at the same time because I got to hold it. So I'll orient the part one way, X, Y, and Z is one way for the first operation, and then I'll turn it over, and now my model, X, Y, Z, is upside down, but my cutting is still the same. So when I cut the bottom, I'm not going to cut through the top to cut to the bottom. I got to flip the part over. So that would be an example of 2 different origins, just as an example. That's not important right now. What's important is that the container, and then that each container has its own sort of representation in the universe. Okay, so if I were to draw something, let's just draw a square. So parametric CAD means, which is what the basis of this CAD is, I draw something, it has dimensions, I then extrude that out into a 3-dimensional object, but I can go back into the drawing, change the dimensions, and it will cascade down into the 3-dimensional object. So let's say I make a 1 inch by 1 inch drawing, and then I extract it out 1 inch, but then I realize, what it really needs to be is 2 inches. So I can go into the drawing, and instead of extruding out everything manually, I just go into the drawing and say, you know, this 1 inch thing, I really want it to be 2 inches. And this 1 inch thing, I really want it to be 2 inches. And when we go to extrude it out, I want it to be 2 inches. Boom, boom, boom. It's now 2 inches by 2 inches. So that's the concept over here. So let me illustrate that concept. So in my component, the very first thing I'm going to do this, but I'm going to walk you through in a separate video all the components of this. But I'm going to come in here and create a drawing. So I'm in my component. So right now it thinks I'm in component 3 because it's the active component. I got to come up here to component 1, and I'm going to click on that to make that active. If this was active and I thought I was down here doing that stuff, but that's active up here, and but I've highlighted it, and I think this is active. It's not. It doesn't. You can't. You can click on it a million times, but it's not going to make it active. You have to tell the computer, I want this to be active. Okay. Now, I'm going to come in here. You've got solids, surfaces, sheet metal, and tools. We're going to focus in on. We don't have a solid yet, so we need to create a drawing. So that's create sketch. So boom, I'm going to click on the create. I'm in the right component, and I'm going to click on the right sketch. Okay. So I'm going to leave this video here, and I'm going to start the next video with the sketch.